All right, screenagers, we are back. We got another episode of the Canon, the only movie podcast providing you with the most essential movies. We've got a super fun one today. We have assembled finally the Screenage Wasteland Avengers. We've got Bob, we've got RJ, we've got Duke, and we've got Jacob. Welcome, team. We've finally assembled for what many are calling the biggest crossover event in canon history. So, really looking forward to talking about Marvel's The Avengers with you guys, why it deserves its place within the canon. How is everyone doing? There's so many people here.
Doing good. Ramblers
Well,
assemble.
yeah, we're having a good time already.
I am good. I'm here. I'm excited to talk about all of it.
Sweet. Well, screenagers, listeners, we've got so many folks here, got a lot of opinions. We got a lot to talk about. So I think really we're just going to dive right in. There's not much of an intro that we need to give. We're talking 2012's The Avengers, a movie that really, in many ways, has like fundamentally changed the way that we as audience members interact with movies and consume them and, all that good stuff for better or worse. So there's a lot to talk about. There's also a really awesome movie here that we're going to get to talk about, which will be really fun. So I think we can just dive right in. Before we get into the movie itself, just to get a bit of like background from each of you, I was wondering if anyone was, if anyone grew up reading comic books, if you guys were big Marvel fans before any of these movies came out or anything like that. Bob, I want to kick it over to you first for this question.
Okay. Yeah, sure. I've been reading comics since I was old enough to read. I remember my dad would, on the way home from work, would stop at the local convenience store and just grab a couple of comics every time at the end of the week. So, yeah. And then I remember watching Marvel superhero shows when I was a kid. So the Hulk, Spider-Man, those were essential parts of my childhood growing up. I think the first thing I ever remember drawing was a picture of Spider-Man in crayon. I've been waiting for this movie my entire life. So it holds a special place in my heart for that reason, if no other.
I love that. That's amazing. RJ, were you a big comic book reader growing up in your young days?
I was not. I was a big fan of the 90s X-Men animated series. And I did read a little bit of X-Men comics just, from being super into that. But otherwise I was not a comic book kid.
That show did kick ass though.
It was
Might make an appearance in recommendations later. Who's to say?
Oh,
Ooh, little sneak preview.
no spoilers.
No spoilers. Duke, what about you? Were you a big comic book reader?
I read Archie comics. I always say if people have the Marvel or DC question, I would always say Archie. I was a big Archie guy. I didn't really read Marvel or DC. Archie has those digests. They're like the small things they sell them at grocery stores. So that's kind of how I got in with that. And then I just kind of watched the Marvel movies. I like the 90s Spider-Man show. I watched that.
Another great show. Are we talking the animated series?
Yeah, Spider-Man the animated series from 94 to 97, 98. But otherwise, I don't think... Oh, I watched the original Spider-Man, like the 60s one. That was on like some retro channel. I watched Adam West's Batman, but that's a different universe. And then, I think Captain America... Well, I didn't see... Actually, the Avengers was the first MCU movie I saw in theaters. The rest I just watched on DVD. So, yeah, that's kind of... my foray into the Marvel universe.
Sweet. And Jacob, last but not least, were you a comic book reader in your early days?
No, not really. I would occasionally pull a Spider-Man comic out at the bookstore or a Scooby-Doo comic randomly.
Nice.
And there was like comics in, I don't know if you guys remember, there was like a digest called Disney Avengers. And there was also a Nickelodeon magazine.
No.
And I enjoyed those comic strip sections. But yeah, really not a huge part of my childhood, especially not in terms of Marvel or DC. Uh, Definitely not the storylines along long trips of comics for sure.
Cool. So really, Bob, you're like the only comic book
Nerd.
reader among us. For at least in terms of like leading up to the movie. I myself, I mean, I would read some here and there. I know my dad had he had a decent little collection of comic books. He did, this is not related at all, but he had an original printing of the Batman Death in the Family comic, and
Ooh.
I got in trouble because I took it to school one day to show my friends, and he was so mad because he had kept it in like mint condition, like still in all the packaging and stuff, and I almost ruined it by being an idiot. But other than that, like I would read comics like here and there, going to like comic book shops to pick up baseball cards and Pokemon cards. I would also maybe grab like one X-Men comic or like a Spider-Man comic. But it sounds like, Bob, you're really the only avid reader of comics and like the only one with a real relationship to these Marvel characters before this movie came out. So I want to send the next question to you first. What was your like level of anticipation for this movie when it first came out?
Oh, for this movie, the anticipation was high because, of course, by the time it came out, we'd already had, a handful of successful Marvel films. And it really, you got to go back to Iron Man for this, because when I was a little kid, like the first job that I ever got was delivering newspapers, which sounds really stereotypical, but I used money from that to buy my first comic book subscriptions. And my two first comic book subscriptions were to The Incredible Hulk and Iron Man. And they were my two favorite characters forever. And so when the Iron Man movie came out, I remember being like, oh God, they're going to screw this up so bad. This can't be a good movie. They're going to screw up Iron Man, and it's going to ruin the chance of getting an Avengers movie ever. And thank God I was so wrong about that. That was such an awesome movie. And while I didn't appreciate every movie that came out, I enjoyed Thor, but I didn't think it lived up to the same level as Iron Man, for instance. But I was excited that they were being successful and each one was more successful. So I knew that this was going to arrive and that they had a chance to make it something great. So yeah, it was definitely like, I'm going to get to see these characters all together on the big screen. I can't believe this is happening, sort of nerdgasm event for me. Yeah.
Sweet. So you were there opening night, opening weekend, just ready to go.
Yeah. And I don't like to go opening night, but I couldn't not be there opening night for this. So
I think we got to
Amazing.
talk just briefly about you, since you mentioned opening night. I remember going to see this on like the Saturday, so the day after, and like no lineup, like, and this is a small city, but I remember Shrek 2 had like a line around the block, for instance, where Avengers, we just walked in, which I think just goes to show how big the MCU has grown since the Avengers, that, you got to book. Booking tickets wasn't a thing back then, but just kind of, you didn't have to worry about, you could show up and get a seat, where now it's like, no, you can't walk into a theater and just hope to get a seat now.
yeah.
Well, was it still like a fairly packed house for you, Duke, when you saw it?
Yeah, like it's just like at the time it would have been a one screen theater, and it would have sat probably 150, 200 people. It would have probably been mostly full, because you only get one movie, so people are gonna go see it. But like I just remember like just thinking how like looking back how wild it is that you just would show up and you show up like 10-15 minutes early so you can get your snacks before the movie starts, and no big deal, get some good seats. Where now Avengers Endgame, I'm sure at that theater I went to where I live now, it would have been like around the block. You would have had to show up like a good hour early.
Well, I think we'll get into this throughout the course of the discussion, but this movie does kind of, to what you're saying, it does sort of represent the end of a certain kind of era of movie watching and really ushered in a new audience experience for movies in a lot of different ways, including what you're talking about, like sort of this is like the last blockbuster movie where you could just sort of go 20 minutes, 30 minutes beforehand and just like get a ticket, and you'll be in a mostly full theater, but you can still get a seat, and just like how that's all changed up to this point. But back to just like anticipation levels, Jacob, were you like looking forward to this when it first came out? Did you see this movie in theaters?
So I'm really struggling to remember if I saw this in theaters. I'm kind of sure I did. I remember distinctly seeing Iron Man and Iron Man 2 in theaters, and I know the anticipation at that time was pretty high. I can't remember if I saw Captain America and Thor in theaters or not either. I know that I was not as into the MCU at this point because I remember going to Captain America the Winter Soldier, and that really kind of kicked off my like, okay, this is really really cool. And then I kind of went back and rewatched some of it. So I don't remember if I even went to the theater. Honestly, I can't remember that. I remember like seeing some of the later Avengers certainly in theaters.
Yeah,
I'm not sure that I made it to this one in the theater.
that's interesting. That's really interesting. RJ, what about you? Were you looking forward to this? Did you see it in theaters?
I didn't get to see it in the theaters. I was very much looking forward to it, but I was pretty pregnant with my middle daughter when it came out in the theater, and I had a toddler, and my husband was traveling for work, so it was not in the cards to go to the movie theater. But I was,
Yeah, fair.
um, yeah, eagerly awaiting it coming out to rent, or I can't. I'm trying to, that's many years ago. So we watched it at home as soon as we could. I don't remember if we bought the DVD or if it was streaming, but it was.
Yeah,
I
this may have been like the early days of like Netflix streaming, or like late days
Yeah,
of Netflix mail-in rental DVDs.
yeah. I know we had um satellite, so it may have been on one of the pay-per-view channels at, at that time, but it is actually a really clear memory for me of being super excited to finally sit down and be able to watch it. And I was a huge fan, am a huge fan of Iron Man. And so after watching that, which I was reluctant to watch, but my husband got me to watch it, and then I fell in love. And so I was super excited for the Avengers to come out. And so it did not disappoint.
Yeah, I remember I saw this in theaters. I want to say opening weekend. One of my good friends, he was a big comic book guy, so he was super excited for it. He was like, I can't believe they're making an Avengers movie. I remember I had seen Iron Man 1 and 2 in theaters, and I enjoyed them, but I wasn't like crazy pulled into the MCU at that point, or sort of what they were doing. So like I remember going into the movie thinking, this is like kind of a sequel to Iron Man 2, I think, but also that other guy from that other movie is in it, and also Captain America's in it, I guess, but like he had his own movie, so it's kind of a sequel to that too. I don't really know what that means, but whatever, like we'll go check it out. And it's just so funny like looking back on it and realizing how foreign of an idea that was sort of to all of us. But Jacob, I know you have something that you want to jump in with, so what do you got for us?
Well, as we're talking about our first experience with this movie and remembering this is the first pod I've been on where it's a movie released in all of our lifetimes, especially mine. And so I think that adds a little context to, not to put anyone on the spot, but um, this movie released in May of 2012. So I would have just been graduating high school. So there was a lot going on in my life, obviously, when this movie came out, which might be why I don't particularly remember it.
I would have to look back on the release schedule, but this might be the most recent release that we've had an episode about. So it is really, it's 12 years old at this point, but still very much so within all of our lifetimes. So like there are specific memories that we all have in terms of like when the movie first came out, which is a really interesting exercise that we haven't really been able to do for a lot of other movies. It's a lot of times it might be, some older movies where we remember watching it like at TV or at home on the TV with our parents or with our family or something like that. But this is really something where we all have like specific memories about where we were in our lives when this movie came out. Like RJ was pregnant. Jacob is graduating high school. Bob has been looking forward to this since he was a child. Duke is Canadian. Like just so much stuff is going on. But yeah, there really is such a good point, Jacob. So we all had some sort of levels of anticipation, varying. I think Bob, RJ, you guys were probably a little bit on the higher end than like Jacob and Duke. You guys somewhere like the three of us were maybe a tier below, but still somewhat looking forward to it. So like, how did you guys feel walking out of this movie for the first time? Or RJ, for you, I guess, how did you feel after that first watch on your couch? Were you like, this is a game changer, or were you just like, that's an awesome movie?
Well, the first thing I felt was that if I had abs at that point, they would have hurt tremendously because we laughed so much. It is for all of the seriousness and the really awesome action scenes, the humor is my favorite part. But I don't know if I thought this is a game changer, but I know that my husband and I were both almost immediately like, yeah, I could watch that again right now. And
Mm-hmm.
it's, it is now 12 years later, and we can still, anytime one of us put that movie on, and everyone in my house will gravitate to the couch and sit down and watch it. If we watched it last week, it would still
Yeah.
be a top pick for all of us.
This movie's aged phenomenally.
Yeah. Seriously. Well, Duke, what makes you say that?
A variety of reasons. One, this is kind of when Marvel sort of knew how to connect everything, but also let it stand on its own. I know Josh Whedon, the writer director, talked about in the sequel having more trouble kind of connecting the various threads from all these sequels, and then also making it so that people who just watched Avengers would then understand what's going on in Age of Ultron, where you only had 4 films predating 4 or 5 films predating the Avengers. So it stands. You can kind of get the gist of what's going on. Also, the special effects. I remember when Ruffalo, they announced Ruffalo was going to play Bruce Banner, and I was like, oh, well, at least the Hulk will look the same. And then they announced they're going to change the Hulk's design, and I was like, oh, terrible decision. But the Hulk's special effects just hold up, especially now. Like Smart Hulk looks whatever, but the VFX isn't slacking as it is now for some major motion pictures. So just the humor hits, and we can talk about this later. I think the whole issue about like shooting on location, practical versus an over reliance on special effects now in Hollywood. I don't know. There's just something that it feels. Jake was just talking about how this might be the most recent movie we've covered on the pod, but it feels like one of those older movies we've already covered, like Back to the Future, Predator. There's just something I don't know. I still have a hard time believing it's been like 12 years since this movie. So I guess you could kind of call it a modern classic now, since it's been over a
Mhm.
decade. But I don't know. There's just something that I guess we're in a different era now for Hollywood. It just feels like I was watching this, the DVD and all the Disney, whatever DVD starting screens and all like the commercials. And I was just thinking, oh, this looks so old school, which of course to me it would, to you guys it maybe not, since old school for you would be a different decade. But I don't know, it's
Well,
aged
I
really
think
well, I think.
I think this movie sort of represents the end of a certain era in Hollywood and also the beginning of what is probably our current era of Hollywood that I would say
Yeah.
is maybe sort of like on like its last legs.
When you were, I don't know if we talking about my written canon article after we started recording.
No,
Maybe
that was
that
before
was
Mike's
before.
run.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
anyway, in my written piece on the Avengers, I mentioned kind of how this kickstarted the shared universe, and then I kind of was just thinking now how maybe if the Avengers had bombed, we wouldn't have this term called content, where everything has to be content. Everything
Hmm.
needs to have a shared universe, and that universe is content. It fuels the machine. If the Avengers had bombed, maybe we would have been more well off overall in Hollywood. We wouldn't have superhero movies probably, but maybe we wouldn't have to try to greenlight a million projects before one's even hit the screen.
So I do think that is a really, really interesting discussion that we will want to have about this movie, but I don't want to get there just yet. I do sort of want to put a pin in that and just stay with the idea that this movie represents the end of like that like mid 2000s era of Hollywood and like that sort of feel. Like Bob, do you have that same feeling that like the like Raimi Spider-Man through Daredevil through Iron Man and all that stuff is then sort of like ended with the Avengers?
Yeah, I actually, as Duke was talking about it, I was trying to nail down as I watched it yesterday, and it's actually been quite a while since I watched it, and since I watched any of the first phase films. So I was like, what is it about this film that feels so much more enjoyable to me than any of the more recent, even like the Spider-Man films, which are probably my favorite of the current Marvel stuff, even though they're a Sony co-production sort of things. And I think it does harken back to that more self-contained, even though it's the end result of a bunch of movies coming together. It felt more like a product designed to stand on its own and be entertaining on its own. And after this, it did feel like a bunch of people, especially for blockbusters, felt like they had to create these extended universes where you had to have it's like a TV show where 4 or 5 seasons in, you can't just jump into a TV show anymore because you've got all of this backstory, and that's with everything else. Whereas Avengers harkens back to that older style of filmmaking where everything had to stand on its own as well as be a member of something larger. So that was
Yeah.
what I was missing.
Yeah. I feel like with the storytelling, especially, or just like the mode of storytelling, it represents the end of that sort of era. But also, I feel like with the aesthetic and stuff, it also kind of represents that. Jacob, how do you feel about where this movie sort of sits within the history of blockbuster filmmaking in Hollywood?
I think aesthetic is a good word for it, and I think what Duke was kind of alluding to, and Bob as well, this movie just kind of has that movie magic that we associate with the classics, and I think a lot of it is the practical effects mixed in with the CGI. Even some of the later Avengers sequels, like Infinity War and Endgame, which are, I think everyone thinks those are pretty good to great movies in their own right, but they feel a little weightless to me, and the just large reliance on CGI that doesn't necessarily always look finished. When I was rewatching this one, you see like the NYPD cars flipping around and the taxis and the rubble, and it's all just it's got some kind of grounding that I think later superhero films have been lacking, and you just get people flying around without any real sense of gravity and weight and things like that kind of help to make everything fit.
Yeah, I'm gonna try to not sound like a douchebag. I should have a sound bit on the soundboard for when I sound like a douche, but there's like a tangibility texture to this movie that a lot of like subsequent MCU and just like the superhero movies that have come after this movie don't have. And a lot of it is those practical effects. It's also sort of just like the way that the movie moves and like the way that the camera like captures all of the action. I was rewatching it for this, and you don't typically think of this movie as being one that sort of like reflects the aesthetic of comic books. Like that's a really hard thing to translate to movies, is just like, how do you create a shot that looks like a comic book panel? We've seen it done before, but it is really hard. But I think that this movie has a lot more of that than we typically give it credit for. So, and Bob, I'm gonna kick this to you because you are the biggest comic book fan among us. But do you feel like this movie in particular does sort of translate that sort of like look and feel of actual comic books to a movie format?
It's an interesting question because, for me, modern superhero movies started with Blade, actually in the 90s, because the people started using the camera, and I fail to remember the director's name at this point, but it was a specific thing that he did. They used up angle cameras, but also like when Blade did a superhero landing, what we would call a superhero landing now, he would shake the camera slightly. And it was like it added this sort of elevated element to the filmmaking that made it seem more comic booky. And then, of course, Sam Raimi with the Spider-Man films took that and ran with it, 100 miles an hour. So by the time we get to the Avengers, that language has been created already. And Avengers kind of really perfected it in a way that unfortunately feels like it led to a stultifying effect on films that came after, because they're like, oh, we got to do this now. Except they decided to shortcut all of the actual practical effects. So now everybody's standing on a green screen or a rear projected screen stage. Just the angles, the way that Whedon decided to shoot each character. That I can't remember if Duke was talking about it before we started recording or after, but that 360 shot of all the characters having a bit while the camera is at a low angle, that's just a perfect superhero shot. And it was absolutely mastered in this movie.
For me, there are two shots in particular that I think stand out. There's like that circling 360 shot of all of them, when they're in the big battle, but also in that same battle, there's that one take. And this is an example of like where CGI is used beautifully, like used to perfection to like help us tell the story. But there's that one take, and you get a sense of all of them in their element, in their different fighting styles, and how they complement each other and play off of each other, but also how they're also special within their own right. And it just seems like that kind of like kinetic energy within superhero movies hasn't been, gained since something like the Avengers, where it really does capture all of that so beautifully. And again, like, this movie completely altered the way that we understand movies and the way that Hollywood decided to like give movies to us. But RJ, I want to kind of go back to a few of the things that you mentioned before, just while we're here talking about the actual movie itself. But I think another thing that really works for this movie, and obviously the tone was kind of set with Iron Man, and it runs through this movie really well. And there are a lot of elements of like later MCU movies that do this well, but like the way that this movie balances comedy, action, drama is amazing. It, it's like an actual masterclass. RJ, do you feel like that is like direction, writing? Is that just like the chemistry of the actors that they got to play, the Avengers? Like, what is the reasoning for that? Why is that so good?
Well, I mean, I think it's a combination of all of the above. The pacing is incredible. Like, you don't feel like there's a boring moment of the movie, but you never, or at least I don't feel like it is just rushing through so fast that you can't sink into the moment, that whatever, the serious moments or the action moments or the funny moments, they have just enough space to breathe, but not so much space that you're just like, okay, well, let's get on with the next thing. I do think that this is, for me, kind of the peak of where the storytelling, the performances, and the special effects come together to just create something masterful. And everything that comes after that, it feels like the stakes keep pushing higher, the conflict gets too extra, and like, we got to make it more bigger, badder, got to keep people coming back. And that is, yes, are the stakes high? Sure, the end of the world, that's probably pretty important, but the story stays with the team building that's happening really between the Avengers. And
Yeah.
it's really a story about them as, who they are and how they interact with each other. And a lot of that is very well done I mean, from the performances, of course, they're all awesome. I there's not a single one of them that I don't think does the job of portraying their character well. But the dialogue is well paced, and I think I Joss Whedon is. I love his work. I know he's kind of a douchebag, but the man does
Yep.
good work. So I would certainly attribute some of that to him. I think in general, I think everything I've ever watched of his, like, the pacing is done very well. So I think that's just something that he's got kind of a particular knack for. Who, I don't know who mentioned the special effects. There's enough for, they do incredible things, but not so much that you can't feel like it's tangible. And I really like that. I miss that from
Yeah.
movies of that era and before.
It all feels like really like contained within the movie. Same with the stakes. Like this, I feel like stakes and how CGI is used, and many times like kind of goes hand in hand. Like if you're getting too wild with your CGI, you're probably also getting too wild with your stakes. But like the stakes here, they're, again, like you said, they're big, but it's all very focused, and it's like not easy to follow, but it's like plausible enough to follow. You're like, okay, yeah, I understand why, why the action is moving along in the way that it is. But I think the other great point that you brought up, RJ, is that so much of the driving force of the narrative in this movie is the team building aspect, and like these people learning how to work together. It's not so much like, yes, Loki is there and they need to defeat Loki so he doesn't take over the world, but so much of the dramatic tension is because of their inability to work together. So Duke, like, what did you make of just like how all of the characters are introduced, how they sort of play off of each other in a lot of the early parts of the movie, and just like how all of those different dynamics work out throughout the course of the film?
Yeah, no, this is a great example of how to properly pull in characters from other films, give them each their own moment to shine, then kind of bring them together. It's hard not to talk about the Avengers and the MCU without doing a direct comparison to the DC extended universe, RIP. Where Batman v Superman kind of just throws in Batman, Wonder Woman, Aquaman, Flash, Cyborg get cameos. It's really nobody's story and everybody's story at the same time. Avengers, you already know these characters, and so you just are just picking up with them after their respective films. Fury has some line where it's like, war isn't won by whatever, it's won with soldiers. And then we get this great cut to just Chris Evans punching a bag. Then you splice that with flashbacks. Whedon shows everybody the superior Captain America costume from First Avengers that he didn't bring back for some reason. You got Tony and Gwyneth, what's her name? Pepper Potts. And then you got Phil Coulson. And then, you get Black Widow to bring in Hulk. And then you can really see their relationship kind of that Whedon definitely came up with after the fact. But you can see some signs. You can see where he's going with that. And just Hawkeye gets kind of the short end of the stick. But, and then they kind of slowly, Black Widow brings in Hulk. Then Captain America's on the ship. You meet them. You kind of get these characters, where Steve is like, oh, I've heard all about you and your work and whatever. And Bruce goes, oh, is that all you care about? And he's like, only thing that I care about or something. So, that you get that, Steve doesn't care that he's the Hulk. He cares about who he actually is. And then you get the dynamic, the science bros. I don't know. It's all very seamless. You can tell, I think Hawkeye got the short end of the stick, maybe just because it would be difficult to give screen time to everybody and kind of form these bonds, which is why Hawkeye ends up with more screen time in Age of Ultron. He's kind of responsible for bringing Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver into the Avengers family. I don't know. It's just a great, and this is what I feel is missing in modern MCU. It's just the fact that you do get to see these characters kind of bond and disagree. And then as we see in Age of Ultron and the other Avengers, now that they've set up everything, you can just have fun with this team. And I don't know how they're going to do it now because I don't think they've set up all these characters and their interactions yet. But yeah, I don't know. The Avengers, it's just like classic. Watch Avengers. One of my recommendations later, it's going to touch on this too, is just how to properly set up characters and then bring them together in a way that it just feels natural. It feels like you're actually watching these characters meet in real life. And it's not just like a movie someone wrote.
Absolutely.
I do think that's a skill that Whedon has. He is a douchebag, but he does write character interactions extremely well, and that's served us great here because every character interaction reveals something about the character, advances the plot, and increases the camaraderie, even when it's a conflict between characters. So that's an economy of storytelling that you don't get.
I think one of the interesting things about what you guys are bringing up is that there's this great balance within this movie of, yes, rewarding knowing about these characters from their previous movies and sort of how they've been set up there, but also allowing a fresh viewer to just come into this movie and still be provided with all of the information that they need to know to be able to follow like how the characters are going to interact, what all of their motivations are, how that will, change and develop over the course of this particular film. Like, it's a really hard balancing act that he does there. Jacob, I don't know like what you think about sort of how this movie does that balancing act of making sure that the characters, they've been introduced in previous films, but also giving new viewers all the information that they need to be able to follow the story within this film.
Yeah, there's a lot I could say about that. So, it's great. The opening scene for me is like one of the few parts where it's really cool opening scene. But it's a little rocky for me, a little bit with Loki's introduction, a little dialogue and stuff. But the fact that it starts with Nick Fury and Hawkeye, it's a pretty extended intro to start the Avengers with, and but it works perfectly because you start with that through line of Nick Fury bringing everyone together, and so you have it cuts to that title card, and I think when you come back, your first stop is Black Widow, and she's in that kind of spy scenario where she's tied up, and it looks like she has she's lost the advantage or whatever, and the way that they play around with that, and just getting a phone call in the middle of it and being like, "Hey, I'm in the middle of work. Can you please, not do this right now?" And just setting that up too. That's a great foreshadowing moment for what she does later with Loki in the cage. But so she gets brought in because of Hawkeye, which makes a lot of sense. And then I think it cuts to Coulson is telling her, "You got to go get the big guy." She thinks he's talking about Stark, but he's talking about the Hulk. So that's a fun transition. And then you have the one that Duke mentioned about, wars won by soldiers, and it cuts to Cap. These little dialogue things, even when Tony Stark is brought in, the last thing is, Nick Fury asks Cap, "You have any advice about the Tesseract?" And he says, "You should have left it in the ocean." And then Tony Stark happens to be in the ocean underwater welding something. Even though that doesn't really matter, it's just it's like it tickles the brain or something. And so, but they're every time it picks up, it does a good job of telling you where this character is kind of at in the scheme of things, and you get enough of a balance there of, yeah, here's the basics. Remember, Captain America was frozen for a while. He's man out of time now. He's here. Tony Stark's kind of doing his own thing, and he doesn't. They told him he couldn't be an Avenger. That's all just worked in really quickly, and it's just really snippy in the way that it starts to introduce these characters and pull them back together.
I think one of the coolest things, sort of unrelated to what you were saying, but it just popped into my mind, is the way that the dialogue for Captain America is all like really, really like old school corny, like a dude who was alive in the 40s would talk, and it's like kind of cringy, and then like everything that Iron Man says is like super quippy, and the two of them together sort of like bouncing those kinds of lines and like line readings like off of each other. It's like it's insane how Whedon was able to make it work within the same movie, within the same scene, and like all feel of the same world. I
And
also
really established a through line with that.
Mhm.
I mean, with Cap and Iron Man, all the way, of course, to Civil War, and then that following through all the way to the end of the Avengers, trilogy, part 2, whatever.
I think one of the first like two shots that you get of any of the Avengers, I'm pretty sure it's Cap and Iron Man. And then there's the Thor introduction, which is amazing, and you get that great little fight of the three of them in the woods. Also, the Tony Stark line, Shakespeare in the Park, doth doth mother know that you weareth her drapes as a cape, is like one of the funniest moments in any movie the last like 15 years. But then first you get the a shot of Cap and Iron Man, and then the next shot of like three of them together is Thor, Iron Man, and Cap, and then that sort of builds up to that great shot that Duke was talking about at the end, where you keep like understanding like the dynamics of the group and like who's at the center of it and who is just like an addition or like addendum to said group. I don't know if I'm reading into all of that too much. I'm sure that there are other shots with other characters in it, but to me, like, that was sort of like my reading of like how they were building up the Avenger group and like who has what sort of significance within the dynamic of the team. I don't know if anyone else was sort of picking up on anything similar, or if I'm just like totally losing my mind.
I just had another quick thought pop in my head. It's related. I think it's interesting how really it seems every single person on the team really has a respect for Banner. You know, the moment that was mentioned earlier with Cap not referencing the Hulk, and then Tony doing one of his normal quips and really poking at Banner about the Hulk, but still respecting him so much as a scientist. And they've already touched on the chemistry between Natasha and Bruce. So that's interesting to look at.
The other thing that I sort of wanted to bring up and get your guys' thoughts on is the fact that this movie, because of when it came out, like, this is really the vision of Whedon and Whedon alone. Like, you can tell that there's not a whole lot of studio interference in terms of like, we need to include XYZ, like boom, boom, boom. Like, you look at the credits and it's directed by Whedon, it's story by Whedon and one other person, and then it's screenplay by Whedon. So like, you can tell that, you know, yes, I'm sure Feige was very involved in like how it all played out, but this is a singular person's vision. And I know like a lot of that gets lost within subsequent MCU movies. Duke, do you feel like this movie sort of like shines in like some of the earlier MCU movies, which we've touched on a little bit, but do you think that they all sort of like part of why they feel so different is because of that element of just having one singular voice like actually be the driving force of like what the movie is going to be?
Yes and no. This is kind of, Feige likes to take a page from George Lucas's playbook where, Lucas says that his Star Wars saga was planned from the beginning. Feige likes to say that the MCU was sort of, they had a vision of where it was going to go, but not really, because Whedon apparently threw Thanos in as a post-credit scene. Like, they weren't really, I guess, going to do Thanos until Whedon threw him in there as the person who gave Loki the scepter. And even the post-credit scene quote, to be the court death, is in reference to how Thanos loved the physical embodiment of death. So definitely Whedon, I think, kind of, I think early drafts of the Avengers before Whedon came on had Abomination as a kind of a secondary antagonist. So Whedon definitely crafted his own narrative, because if, and then I think once the Avengers was successful and, made 1.2 billion, which was twice as much as Iron Man 2 had made, which was the highest at the time. That's, I think, maybe when Feige started thinking, okay, we gotta, and Marvel or Disney probably also thought, you need to plan this out. And that's how we get this whole, we have all these sequels, and then you actually got to start because, 6 films, it's easy to keep track of, where now you have 30 dozen TV shows. That's where you need a timeline book and you got to retcon stuff. But even while rewatching just the other day, there's like unintentional setups that wouldn't have been in there at the time. I know a lot of people talk about how when Tony Stark, gets Jarvis in the shield, that wouldn't Tony have found out that Hydra was secretly shield. But on one of the screens, it does say that shield does have something that says a virus detected. So they did have a safeguard in there notifying them Jarvis was in. The Loki scepter just happens to, control people's minds. So then you can retcon that as the Mind Stone. The Tesseract, I always thought, how did Loki get there? I guess because the Mind Stone can connect. Maybe. I don't know how Loki just activates the Tesseract at the beginning, but it can work. The Natasha Bruce romance, you can kind of see them kind of bonding. There is very unintentional ways that this sets up future films unknowingly that, just Whedon did, but, just maybe because he was a fan of the comics and kind of could pull from there. But I think the only person besides Whedon that's had like full creative power has been James Gunn, and since the Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, I think it's some of the strongest material recently. I think Marvel should probably dial it back, because when they get too focused on the larger picture, I think that's when we see start stuff to crumble. Like Black Panther, those two films are pretty much standalone. They're kind of the more stronger work. So yeah, I definitely think Marvel needs to get a couple hands out of the kitchen.
Duke, this gives us a good opportunity to talk about something that that I find super interesting with this movie in particular, and sort of why it's essential, for better or for worse, in terms of how it influenced the rest of filmmaking, or a lot of filmmaking going forward. And I don't know if you mentioned this on mic or if you just mentioned this before we started recording, but you brought up that it kind of looks like a TV show, like it was kind of shot for TV. And my thing with with like how amazing an achievement the MCU Infinity Saga is that it translated TV storytelling to cinema in a way that like really should not have worked. And I think the idea was that like, and Bob, I'm going to kick it over to you for this question. The idea was that, the way that comic books are told is that they're all like, you have these individual issues that are like their own contained stories, but they live within larger universes. And then sometimes those issues build up to certain runs, and then those runs will then like tie into another run, so on and so forth. And the idea was that like we were going to take that mode of storytelling and that those like tools and conventions of storytelling and apply them to cinema, which was absolutely unheard of. I always kind of like I always kind of relate it to television. But Bob, as our resident comic book fan here, like, what do you make of the attempt to translate that form of storytelling to the big screen?
Well, it's funny that you mentioned television, because I was thinking what a genius move it was to actually hire Whedon, who had mostly been known for television up to this point. Yeah, and because television, especially the kind of television that Whedon was involved in, which are series that have characters that evolve complex relationships and an immense mythology over seasons, except for Firefly, God rest its soul. Sorry.
Too soon.
Yes. So he had the same sort of thinking that that comic book writing has, and it's funny to me because comic book continuity was a thing of convenience for the longest time. I mean, probably up until the 70s, it was just, ways to bring back other characters. But it was also similar to television up until the 80s and 90s, where the goal was to have stories that had a connection to a backstory, but ended up with the status quo at the end of the day. And then you get into the 90s and you get shows like Buffy or the X-Files, and you start the mythology starts to be the point. And so bringing that sensibility into a movie that's based on a medium that also has that as its background was just a fantastic move for this. Do I think that they went too far eventually? I think the comics have gone too far in that as well. So yeah, I think they did. But for this, it was a perfect way to have somebody tie those elements in without weighing it down too much. I think I just rambled on way too much.
No, that was great, and that's such a good point about like the specific director that they brought in to tell the story and like his background. I think, a lot of folks will point later to the Russo brothers and sort of like how they were the perfect people to direct a lot of the later MCU movies because they also had their background in TV. So they're
Right.
used to having someone else sort of run the show, and they're just there to direct, and have like a bit of a vision and input for one or two particular stories within a much larger story that is someone else's vision. But so, I mean, with that, like, RJ, do you think the gamble that was made on this movie, like, I know a lot of times when we do the MCU retrospective, it's always like, if Iron Man didn't work, then, we wouldn't have the MCU and like shared universe movie making the way that we do now. But I kind of feel like if Iron Man didn't work, you can just like scrap it and start over. Whereas if Avengers didn't work, then we really would not have movies as they exist today, like with post-credit scenes and shared universes the way that they are like teased and built up the way that they are now. So like, do you feel like this movie was like, what kind of a gamble do you feel like the Avengers was at the end of the day?
Well, first of all, I'm not appreciative of the fact that you actually managed to make me kind of regret the Avengers being made since it resulted in what we have now. But we'll put that aside. I would say I don't think a gamble necessarily, but it could have. I mean, as we've seen over the years, in different hands, it could have gone horribly awry. But I do agree with the points that everyone has made that Joss Whedon's particular skill set and experience, just from TV, yes, but um, the world building, uh, I I think that he does a good job in. I am a huge Firefly fan. Um, I think that he was able to do something with the Avengers that was not quite able to do with the Serenity movie, in that bringing in this, goes kind of a little bit further back. Sorry about that, but the way that each character is introduced in their own little way, and just those small moments are able to give us just enough of the backstory and the character, the personality, to give us what we need to go forward and to connect with each of them and to understand how they connect with each other and with the world around them. And I loved the Firefly one season. I was super excited when the Serenity movie came out, but he did not do as good of a job there in, I think, making it accessible to people who had not seen Firefly as we get with the Avengers, and you know, being able to access it if you have not seen anything else Marvel before. So, and I guess it is somewhat of a gamble because it could have easily not
Yeah,
gone so
there's so many
well.
variations of this movie where it's just like absolute shit and like
Yeah.
total disaster. It's like kind of a miracle that this movie works, let alone is like really good, you know?
And
Yeah.
it's funny. Oh, sorry.
I was gonna say, I mean, it does what it needs to do as a big blockbuster in general, I think. So the odds were pretty good that it was going to make money either way, but I'm glad that it worked the way it did.
I just wanted to point out when we were talking about if Iron Man had bombed, would this have happened? I think it would have happened eventually because we all include Edward Norton's version of the Incredible Hulk in the cinematic universe now, but that was pretty much a bomb. That did not do as
Yeah.
well as they hoped, and for a long time, I didn't realize it was even being included as part of the Marvel universe. It is well accepted now, but at the time, they were just as happy to wash their hands of it and start over.
Yeah. Like I think, with Iron Man and Incredible Hulk and even like Thor and Captain America, like those early movies, if they didn't work, like that's okay. Like there was nothing riding on those movies working the way that like the entire weight of the MCU being built out to the point where it is today, like all of that was, in my opinion, was riding on this movie. And I know we gripe a lot, and we have griped a bit in this episode in particular about like the way that this movie sort of changed cinema, but like yes, has it gotten, a bit overindulgent in the cinematic universes that are built out? Have there been a lot of missteps along the way? Sure. But also, like, a lot of the MCU movies have been like really cool experiences for people like across the globe. Like Avengers Endgame is the biggest movie of all time for a reason, so like it's not all bad. So one thing I kind of want to pivot to is the entire sequence in New York, which to me is like as thrilling as action sequences get, like big summer blockbuster movies. Like that's as good as it gets in my eyes. I could watch the last 40 to 50 minutes of this movie like on a loop and I would be a happy person. So, Jacob, like what do you think about the entire New York sequence, like that whole battle, how it plays out, what makes it so awesome?
Well, there's one thing about this, and it takes place in other parts of the movie as well, but there's so many things about the New York battle sequence that makes it great, but there's so much focus in that sequence amidst the action as the civilians are there. And just like how some of the VFX have made things feel a little weightless, I think sometimes when we don't have the stakes of the regular people to fill out the world, I think that also reduces the stakes a bit. And there's so many shots of, I mean, when you think about heroes, heroes are there to help people. And I think, like, we've all mentioned we don't read comics that much except for Bob, but Bob could probably confirm. I think in a lot of the comics don't, they get crazy, but there's a lot of comics that do show that everyday civilian, at times. And so whenever you have that in the midst, I mean, Cap is directing the police officers and getting civilians to safety, and they're constantly having to try and protect people. At some point during that battle sequence, that shifts a little bit. They finally get it kind of cleared and get to focus on the real, just, superhero versus alien stuff. But the way it's shot, I mean, I remember there was a shot where, you see it from inside of a flipped taxi as it's spinning around. Really kinetic. We've talked about the 360 shot, and that one take I think doesn't get as much credit as the 360 shot, but that one take really is kind of the pinnacle of this whole sequence. And then it ends with humor, with Hulk punching Thor out of the frame. Just that balance between and all the characters' arcs paying off, talking about Tony not being the one to make the sacrifice play. All of that just comes together so beautifully, and it is action, but it's also dialogue. Every piece of it just gels together. And also, of course, you got to mention Hulk absolutely destroying Loki at the very end. Super iconic moment. It's all just terrific.
Cannot be argued is the best scene of the entire movie. I will fight anyone who says otherwise.
Absolutely, it's absolutely amazing. Jacob, because you mentioned it, I have to throw this little bit in, but about the civilians. So I used to live in Midtown Manhattan, and whenever I watch this movie, there's like one shot of one of those giant space eel monster things just like moseying its way through a bunch of buildings and like absolutely destroying them. Or I think maybe it like lands on a building. And whenever I rewatch this, I think to myself, like, if I lived in that building while this happened, I would totally have died. Like, I just totally would have been taken out by that giant eel space alien thing. I've also, like, most of my offices that I've worked in have been in Midtown, in like the general area around Grand Central. So I probably would have been one of the people that Cap was trying to like usher to the subways. But it's always very funny watching the movie and being like, oh yeah, there's my old apartment getting absolutely destroyed.
While we're talking about the civilians, it goes out of the New York battle for a second, but the scene with Cap defending the older man who stands up against Loki obviously has a lot of parallel to that Norman Rockwell image that's also a meme now. The one guy standing up in the midst of everybody sitting down. And in a way that kind of carries over to me to the Battle of New York. Not necessarily Norman Rockwell, but I mean, the taxis are very yellow. The NYPD police cars look very classic. And so the way that they set that scene has just that Americana, and even down to Cap's uniform, which is, I think everyone would probably agree, visually not as cool as the first movie or the movies after maybe, but it works in that sense of in that old fashioned just aesthetic. When you set it up against New York and all that, it kind of pops and brings this really interesting look to it.
That's a really good point. There's a sort of not nostalgic, but there is sort of like a pining for the good old days of this movie.
It feels like, I don't know, I'd never been to New York City or anything, and this was from 2012, but it didn't necessarily to me feel like it was set in exactly real New York City. It was like it was set in idealized American thinking of what New York City looks like, in my opinion. When you see the taxis and the NYPD cars, you don't see like what you have now in a lot of Marvel movies, which is like a lot of Audis, or whatever, modern, sleek looking things. It's like all these really, iconic vehicles that are set up there mostly. So.
Well, that's kind of comic booky, right? That kind of like plays into that aesthetic.
Absolutely.
I so appreciated watching it this time that it's a disaster movie set in New York. Those last 20 minutes are a disaster movie, but they didn't go the easy route of having some, New York City landmarks get destroyed. They used the Stark Tower as the landmark that gets hammered, but it was actually kind of nice to not have to see like, the Empire State Building get hit or the Statue of Liberty or something shoehorned in like that. So
the other thing that that I really appreciate as a New Yorker is that they are they stay pretty true to the geography of where they're fighting. Like, one of my biggest gripes in movies is when they are set in New York, but the geography of the city is like totally misused. And 1 minute you're, at Grand Central, and then the next minute you're at the Statue of Liberty. If you've ever been to New York, and if you know New York, you know that those two things are very far away. And like, that is not something where you just like zip on over to it. And within this movie, it is like all very contained to an actual area that like would make sense for like the action to be held within, which I totally appreciate. But yeah, so I don't know, Duke, do you have anything on the battle in New York while we're here talking about it?
Nope, we've kind of briefly touched on the practical use. There's just something so nice about actually seeing, I don't know, feeling like you could reach out and touch that car or that crumbling building instead of it just being, as we've talked about, everybody jumping around in the air, like that endgame final battle. Like, that 360 shot is just nothing will ever, Whedon tried repeating it in Age of Ultron around whatever that thing that they couldn't let Ultron slam down, but it just, there's just shots in cinema that people will try to recreate, and I think this 360 shot is just one of them. Like, it will never be, you can try to improve upon it, but it will never top the iconic status that this 360 shot has achieved.
Bob, what do you make of the setting for the final fight being New York City, considering the history of Marvel Comics and its roots, and so many of the characters like within the comics living in New York City, being from New York City? Like, did you make anything of that?
Yeah, no, I thought that was a great nod to the classic Marvel Comics, because it certainly seemed in the early days, especially, like every superhero lived in New York somewhere. You had Daredevil in Hell's Kitchen, you had Spider-Man downtown, you had Luke Cage in the Bronx. You had all of this stuff was set specifically in places because the bullpen, the artists in Marvel Comics, also lived in New York City, and so they just drew where they lived, and so all of those characters had that iconic scenery of New York in every issue. So it was kind of a great nod to have, because they could easily have put it in Washington D.C. or whatever. But for it to be a Marvel movie, it really had to be New York and to recognize those roots.
RJ, did you think anything of that, or just general thoughts on how amazing that that final battle is?
Well, I will say to the point of the New York setting, I think if it had been set anywhere else, you couldn't have the scene where Cap tries to give orders to the cops and the cops are like, "Why should I listen to you?" I think only in New York you probably get
Yeah.
that. Um, but that is a great scene. But I can't emphasize enough how many times I had to rewind and rewatch Hulk smashing Loki back and forth. That that first time, we laughed so hard we had to stop the movie, and then we were both my husband and I were both like, I want to watch it again. No, no, let's watch it one more time. One more time. And it is it's that injection of humor into, this end of the world situation where they're all fighting for the fate of the world and they're all wearing down, but no, let's pause for a minute and just watch Hulk annihilate Loki, who
Yeah, and it doesn't take you out of the
actually we
movie.
haven't. No, not at all. It like just seamlessly one thing to the next, and we haven't. I
Yeah,
don't think we've talked really enough about Loki and um how just the movie is nothing without Loki being as awesome as he is. Is
Yeah,
my
yeah, I totally agree. Watching it this time, I was actually amazed at how much I take Loki for granted now, because he's so much a part of the Marvel universe that it's like, oh yeah, watching everybody else, I'm like, oh, this was a nice introduction to this character. Oh, these are nice bits for Iron Man to have or for Thor to have, and then there's Loki killing it because that's what Loki does.
is I think everyone's favorite love to hate, villain, I guess.
absolutely. He's the best villain turned part of the crew, right? You know,
Yep.
it's been done. It's been done many times before in the Ocean's movies and in every Fast and Furious movie. It's done, but like Loki's kind of he's like top tier when it comes to that. So I guess we're here now. We're kind of towards the end of our conversation, and the one big question that we have. Well, actually, before I get to the big question, I totally meant to get this out of the way on the front end, but one of the most important things about this movie and why it kicks so much ass and why so many other movies don't kick as much ass as this movie is because it has Stellan Skarsgård, just like
Yeah,
hanging out. I think that's what really makes this movie special. It's just the Stellan Skarsgård effect. More movies should have him specifically. Other Skarsgårds, hit or miss. Stellan, always love him.
That's fair.
yeah.
Okay.
But in all seriousness, the big question that we haven't asked yet, that we have to get to before we wrap up our discussion on the Avengers, on Marvel's The Avengers, which has been a great discussion, by the way. I must say, you guys all brought the heat tonight. But the big question on everyone's mind: who is everyone's favorite Avenger? And I think, because I know who it's going to be for most of you, so I think I want to go to Jacob first, because I can't put a finger on him. I don't know who he might be leaning. So Jacob, who is your favorite Avenger, favorite character within this movie?
Okay, well, it's interesting how you phrase that. My favorite MCU character that appears in this movie is Captain America. Winter Soldier is my favorite MCU movie, period, and in general, Steve Rogers, his whole arc is awesome throughout the MCU. However, in this movie, Steve Rogers plays an important role, and he's well written, and his interactions with Stark in particular are really great. But he's not quite given as much to do in this movie. And probably in this movie, it's got to be Tony Stark for me. I mean, rewatching the movie, it's just so good. I mean, it really, he's the one that makes the big sacrifice or potential sacrifice at the end. The Avengers always, as they were leading up to this, was really kind of still Tony Stark's world, and he was kind of the lead of the Avengers. Not really the leader of the group, but kind of the lead character of this movie. But so I would probably go with Tony Stark in this movie.
Nice. All right, Bob, going to you next.
Yeah, so since I was a kid, Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk have always kind of gone back and forth for my two favorite characters. But coming into this movie, I had felt like the Hulk really hadn't had his due yet. I really liked Edward Norton as Bruce Banner, but I really did not like what they did with the Hulk. He looked like a video game character to me in that movie. I actually like the way the Hulk looks in Ang Lee's movie, but didn't like the Banner aspect of that film. So in this film, I really felt like they nailed both aspects of the character. And Mark Ruffalo's performance is just fantastic in this movie. Just the little things that he does with his face and how he holds himself even. Loved every part of it. And I loved the way the Hulk looks, how scary he is in parts of that. My favorite line in the whole movie is actually, "That's my secret, Captain. I'm always angry."
Yeah,
that's my favorite line in the movie. So yeah, the Hulk. I really wished one of the big missed opportunities in the Marvel universe was a Science Bros film with Ruffalo and Robert Downey Jr. just hamming it up on a road trip somewhere. I really wish I'd seen that. But yeah. That's my favorite character.
You can pitch it to them. They'll bring back Downey Jr. and I'm sure Ruffalo would love that too. Amazing.
That should have been the post-credit scene.
Yes,
them driving off into the sunset. RJ, who's your favorite?
It is always going to be Iron Man.
Nice.
I have loved Robert Downey Jr. forever. And so I was biased coming into it anyway, but I just love really smart, really sarcastic people. and his brand of humor and arrogance speaks to my soul. So I love Iron Man. A close second, maybe not a super close second, but Loki. I love Loki. He's so delightfully wicked. It's
the shot of him catching the arrow is so cool.
Yes.
So good. All right, Duke. This is a moment that you've been waiting for, that we've all been waiting for. Explain yourself, brother. I know I've been giving you a lot of shit leading up to this.
Loki looks so cool catching that arrow. Unbeknownst to him, it explodes right after. Oh, Hawkeye thinks of everything.
Yeah, but that doesn't matter.
What can you say? Hawkeye, one ordinary guy, but also has he doesn't even need superpowers, yet he kind of has one. It's just being really good at archery. I don't know. I've always liked archery kind of as a sport. I always thought it was kind of, cool. Robin Hood, I'm kind of a fan of as well. Green Arrow. I don't know. I kind of like the superheroes that don't really have too many powers. I like Nightwing too, in that regard. I don't know. I can't really say besides, like, if Hawkeye didn't use archery, like he was using crossbows or something, maybe crossbows. Like if he had like a different, like he used the bow staff, I probably wouldn't care about Hawkeye. Yeah, it's just that I don't know. I like the archery aspect, and I don't. Is that book here? It's
Well,
not.
let me let me. Sorry, I was going to ask you: did you like Hawkeye when you saw this movie, or did you like Hawkeye better after?
No, I liked Archery
reading
way before that, and then I liked Hawkeye even more. Age of Ultron, I think he gets like a really Whedon actually gives Hawkeye some really cool lines and kind of stuff.
That's true.
So, Duke, did you walk out of this movie and think like, "Wow, Hawkeye was the coolest guy in that movie"? And I'm not asking that question.
I'll tell you this though. I went into it. You know how nobody knew who was in Infinity War really? I walked out of Infinity War being like, wow, can't believe Hawkeye wasn't in that at all. I was pissed. And then he was the first scene in Endgame, so I was okay. But man, I remember being like I it was like 2 hours into Infinity War, and I'm like, Hawkeye is not going to show up in this movie. I just have a feeling. So, at least he gets lines, and he's the villain in Infinity or the first Avengers, kind of. So it's like, but Hawkeye's got a great comic book series.
That's where
Matt Faction. I don't know if there's. I always forget if there's an R in his name or not. Yeah, that's a great run. I've kind of dove into Hawkeye a bit more since then, but yeah. I don't know, I just like Hawkeye. It's mostly the archery aspect, I think Jeremy Renner does a pretty good job with them too. Mm-hmm. I'm a big guy. I kind of like Jeremy Renner as an actor as well. So kind of like those two together, archery, Jeremy Renner, made me like Hawkeye. And then I don't know, you can do worse than being married to what's her name? Hawkeye's wife in the show, Linda Cardinelli. I mean, come on.
Yeah.
So, no, Hawkeye. Yeah. And he's underrepresented. I mean, Tony Stark is, nothing without that suit of armor, as we, Hawkeye could boom,
millionaire Playboy philanthropist.
Yes.
Hawkeye, though, also in this movie, he's sidelined obviously for like half the movie, but I mean, in the New York battle, he's got a lot of cool moments. I mean, Duke already mentioned the Loki explosion, but he's also got the no look shot, and he's got his jumping off the building, and he's pretty cool in his own right when he gets a chance to shine. He's just sidelined for most of this movie.
But then Jeremy Renner does that weird flex thing when he jumps through the window and he's like on all the broken glass. For some reason, that shot of him.
It's not the best.
Like gasping for air, like always gives me the heebie-jeebies.
I think Hawkeye's great. And I also think that he brings a little bit more of the seriousness to the movie. I mean, I love my Iron Man snarkiness, but without some sense of somberness and weight to the story, then there's not as much room for a payoff, I guess. And he represents the more personal aspect of what is the world going to look like if Loki just takes everybody over. This is what it is. And he shakes it off, and he's pissed. And that seems, I think, to be, I guess, a better that's balance. That's what I'm trying to say. It brings balance to the banter of all the other ones have going on. So,
all right, we spent too much time on Hawkeye.
Not enough.
Yeah, what's yours?
I do just I enjoy giving you crap for it. I don't know if I have one. There are a lot of great characters that we haven't mentioned. Are you only saying that because I'm black?
And because of the artwork that, listeners, you'll have to go to the Screen Age Wasteland website, because Jacob's got a wicked Photoshop that we're going to share with the episode.
Nice tease.
And Raph was Nick Fury, just to tie it in,
Well, because Raph is the Nick Fury of the canon, so.
And wait till you see that bucket hat Raph's wearing. Just, oof. That's a little teaser for you.
I do love Sam Jackson. Nick Fury is obviously a really important through line throughout the movie. He's, sort of the driving force behind trying to get this whole team together. So, definitely want to show love to Nick Fury. Also want to show a little bit of love to the Natasha character, because I do think that it kind of sucks that Scarlett Johansson, one of the better acting talents of her generation, who should have been afforded like a lot better writing for her character within the series, and was like so often just like left to be like the hot girl when she has like so much more to offer. But I think that her character does have, a decent little arc here, decent storyline applied to her. So I want to give her a shout out as well. I think this is kind of like generally a controversial take, but I'm not the biggest Mark Ruffalo guy. Like there's something about him that kind of skeeves me out. But I do think that the whole character and, his portrayal of Banner in this is pretty solid. And then, Downey Jr. as Tony Stark it's like there was a time in the 2010s where it was like hard to distinguish where the character ended and where Downey Jr. began. Like the two just became so, like one and the same. And then Cap, unfortunately, like I think Chris Evans like really hit the jackpot here, because this is like the perfect role for him. But I find that character to be so infuriating, just like the lamest dude ever. I think it's just because I would never want to hang out with a guy like Captain America in real life. Like I would just
I got to pause and ask you. You said Chris Evans hit the jackpot, and then you said he's lame. So are you saying Chris Evans hit the jackpot because he's also just lame? So then he just plays himself, kind of, or are you saying
No.
Chris Evans? Like
I think
I
Chris
just want
Evans
to make
is-
sure you're not dissing on Chris Evans as well.
I don't want to diss on Chris Evans too much. I think he's a subpar actor who was a really perfect fit for this role, and like he's the only person who could embody Captain America like the way that character needed to be embodied over the course of these movies, and he's like really good at that. But I just find that character to be so dull. Like, could you imagine having a beer with that guy?
He
Oh my
warms
God,
up in the later films.
No, he doesn't. He stays just like a total. He's such a pill.
He gets some he gets some personality in the sequels.
Captain America
You're
is
doing him wrong.
he is like what Superman should be. He is what Superman should be in the other universes. Cap is great. He's bad. He's lame in this movie. Whedon characterizes him this way a little bit, but he's pretty cool. Come on.
I guess I'm not
I
big
agree
on
that
like the
Chris
whole like
Evans does a
Boy
great job
Scout
of being
vibe.
boring.
What's that, RJ?
I think I agree Chris Evans does a great job of being boring. Of the actors they could have chosen to be boring, I think that he does a top-notch job.
RJ's taking it a step
going
further.
on?
Am I the only one that is like my favorite's Captain America or likes Captain America? Or
I like Captain America. I would like
ah.
Captain America like more than I'd say Thor and Hulk and Black Widow.
I'm not trying to get into a out of this movie. I mean, he is pretty lame in this movie, but I don't think I just don't get that from Captain America, that he's just a Boy Scout. That I think he's the moral compass for the universe in a lot of ways. And he's very concerned with doing what's right. And the evolution over his whole movie arc is great.
Yeah.
I mean, in this movie, you start to see that where he's like, well, look, we have orders. Nick Fury brought us here. And Tony Stark's like, come on, man, there's more going on. And he finds those weapons, and that starts that, whole flip-flop for Captain America over the next movie. So.
Yeah, for sure. I know that's a great point. And there is a lot to be said about his character arc. I think for me, it's just like in my real life, my sensibilities probably align more with Tony Stark than they do with someone like Captain America. Like in school growing up, like I was more the person to be making the quippy jokes and rolling my eyes at the kid in the back who's like, didn't we have homework due today? And that's like the entire Captain America character.
It's hilarious to me because before he became Captain America, that was the kind of character I knew him as playing, as the wise ass, kind of smarmy character. Yeah. And, I'm trying to remember movies that he was in.
Not another teen movie.
And there was a
And
like a science fiction one where
he was the other comic book, the four.
Fantastic
The-
Four, yeah.
Fantastic Four, yeah. Johnny
Thank you,
Storm.
thank you. My brain
Yeah.
just went completely blank. And yeah, he's like the Playboy smartass, and that definitely seems on brand to the really attractive blonde guy stereotype. So
Yeah.
I think again, does a good job
Uh,
of
Push. Push was
makeup,
the other
but
movie that he was in. That he was a
Oh,
wise ass, sort
yeah.
of young buck sort of thing. So anyway,
Well, yeah. That
I
I
think
mean,
Jacob and Bob need to come back when you finally get around to a Winter Soldier raft, because I think they'd
did we not do that already? No, we did not.
oh yeah,
not on the and Raph says he's not a fan of Winter Soldier, so
Right.
I am definitely in on Winter Soldier.
there you go.
Oh man.
I really feel like we need to be. We got to add Civil War to the canon so we can
Oh no.
really duke things out.
That'll be a good one.
I have a soft spot for Civil War.
Yeah, I do.
One more thing though on Samuel L. Jackson and Nick Fury. I think I'm not sure if in Iron Man 2 if he was in the movie proper, but he was barely in it if he was. So this was really our first big role for Nick Fury, and I kind of took that for granted until I rewatched it, and he's just so killer. He's so funny. He gives so much. I mean, Nick Fury really does deserve some credit for this movie because he's a awesome character.
Yeah,
I
you're
think
right about
with that, like this is really the only movie in the entire, like, Samuel Jackson makes an appearance in probably like 20 out of the 35 MCU movies that there are. And maybe I'm inflating those numbers, but whatever. So this is the only one where he is like actually dialed in his performance. Like in the Captain Marvel movies, like you can tell that he's mailing it in, and everything else, it's just like a cameo here, one scene there. And this one, like Sam Jackson gets a lot of room to breathe, or at least a lot more than he does in other MCU projects. And like you can tell that he's kind of bought in, and it kicks ass. Like when you have Sam Jackson bought into what it is that you're doing, like your movie's going to be elevated a little bit. And you definitely see that here.
I'd say he is in Winter Soldier too, actually.
Yeah, this and Winter Soldier are his two biggest Nick Fury role. Well, and Secret Invasion, but we don't have to talk about that. After that, like, with S.H.I.E.L.D. going away, like Marvel didn't really know what to do with Fury after, because he just kind of disappears. They bring him back just to get dusted, and then we don't see him again till like basically Secret Invasions is his next biggest role outside of the 90s set Captain Marvel. So yeah, like Fury was a huge part in kind of building up to the Avengers. Like he's recruiting everybody, and then after it's just like Marvel's like, okay, thanks, Sam, and then
yeah,
when we need you.
When you get Sam Jackson to be like committed to your movie in a meaningful way, it ends up being in the canon. So it's a lesson learned, Marvel.
Yeah.
If you're listening, Kevin. Well,
one character that I don't think we've really mentioned, but that I do love is Agent Coulson.
Yes.
You just wait, RJ. My recommendations. Coulson's going to get some love too.
okay.
Don't you worry.
Okay. Yeah.
we also went that
He
entire
brings
discussion
the
without talking
heart.
about Thor.
Yeah, that's okay.
Thor is not like, you can see how like Thor is just kind of, if we're talking dull, Thor is pretty dull. Like Thor didn't have a humor. Like Ragnarok is almost too funny, and then Thor: Love and Thunder, it's too much. Like between like, I don't know, there's a seriousness to Thor that you need, and he's a bit too serious in Avengers. He needs to just, I don't know, lighten up a bit. But that again comes with, in an Age of Ultron, when all these characters are kind of friends now, then you kind of get where everybody's joking around a bit and having some fun, where
I think
everybody
the
warms
disconnect
up.
there is that it makes sense for the character of Thor, but for the performer that you have, his talent is more so the humor, the charm, the charisma. It's not being like a serious, brooding kind of guy. And there was like a disconnect certainly in this movie and in a lot of a lot of other things that feature that character up until Ragnarok, which is why that movie
He has some good funny moments though.
Yeah,
became
there's a couple. But he's still at that stage where he's just like, you humans. What he says something like, "Oh, you guys are so petty," or
And
when they're all
tiny.
arguing.
The
Yeah,
Thor and Hulk fight was cool though.
that is a good. I forgot about that
Yes.
fight, and I was like, man, like we're missing more of this in these movies, where it's just like this kind of like. And I remember seeing the behind the scenes, like how practical that was. Nowadays, that just be all in the computer getting made, but they actually filmed that, and they had the gigantic Hulk costume kind of made, so they knew where he had to punch. Oh, like Hulk and Thor. Like no wonder you watch this, and then you're like, yeah, it makes sense that you would put Hulk and Thor together for Ragnarok. Like it's just this relationship that they kind of have, this like frenemies almost, friends from work. It's just,
Yeah.
That is my favorite part of any of the Thor movies.
is he's a friend
Oh,
from
yeah.
work?
Yeah. Yes.
And a kid came up with that. That
Because
wasn't
when
even a
they're-
writer, because Hemsworth says like they had like one of those like like kids who are he was
Make a
kinda
Wish.
sick, so then Make a Wish, and he was there, and he said you should say that he's a friend from work, and that's like the best line. So sucker
That's
whoever wrote that
amazing.
movie, I guess.
Well, Friends, Avengers. I don't know what else. We've I think we've covered all of our bases. We do still have to do recommendations, and I know we're starting to get into the later hours of this episode, so we don't want to keep our lovely listeners for too much longer. Although we do appreciate the support of those of you still sticking with us. So unless there are any objections out there, I think we can transition over to the recommendations section, since I'm sure that will get a little lively too. We'll try to keep all explanations and conversations about recommendations to be as short and concise as possible. But we're gonna get riled up a little bit, obviously. So yeah, unless there are any objections, what do you guys say? We can jump into it.
Let's do it.
Oh yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Sweet. So, in case there are any new listeners out there, for each movie that we introduce into the canon, we also recommend 3 things to check out if you like said movie. At least one of those things has to be another movie. The other 2 things can be any and everything else. It can be more movies, it could be a book, it could be a comic book, it could be a painting, a museum, a restaurant, an album, a band, really anything. We like to get super creative. The only 2 rules that we have are we stick to a 3 recommendation limit, no more, no less, no 2-for-1s, and any movies that get recommended, they cannot be movies that are already in the canon. So, like we said, Captain America: The Winter Soldier is also in the canon. So, if we're recommending any MCU movies, it can't be that one. But anything else is fair game. So, with all that, I think we can jump in for the order. Let's go RJ, Jacob, Duke, Bob, Raph. So RJ.
Oh man, I gotta go first.
Yeah, we're putting you on the spot.
Well, I had like a list in case some of my things were recommended by other people, so now I don't know where to go first. I'm gonna start with probably the like least related thing that I have on my list,
Nice.
and that is the animated movie Sing.
Wow.
Interesting.
And yes, so Raph, you didn't think we gave enough love to Scarlett Johansson, and I do happen to love her, and I like Black Widow's awesome. But she was a punk rock porcupine in the movie Sing, and is my favorite character in
That's
that.
awesome. Oh
It's
my
a movie
God.
that the kids and I love. It is excellent. She has a
That's
song, like
amazing.
her singing voice is so cool. And she has a song in there that it's just, I don't care that I'm not a kid. It's one of my favorites.
I love that. I've not seen that movie, but might have to add it to the list now.
I saw it in the Universal Studios Hollywood movie theater there on their downtown strip with my family
Nice.
when we were
That's
vacationing.
awesome.
That's
That's
sweet.
a movie that always it's gonna stick with me for that reason. So interesting choice, RJ. I like that.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. So out of left field, but so perfect. Amazing first choice. All right, Jacob, what's your first one?
So I have a real recommendation, but I would ask if I could be indulged momentarily for. I can't recommend Toy Story because it's in the canon, but
Mhm.
I just wanted to point out the connective tissue between the two. I think both Avengers and Toy Story reshaped their respective genres or cinema
Mhm.
in many ways that people, sometimes maybe for the worse. Toy Story introduced 3D animated feature film, and that has kind of led to the very sparse 2D animated art, which was wonderful, and I kind of missed that. As great as Toy Story is, and as great as 3D animated films can be, we talked a lot about the same issue with Avengers of the shared cinematic universe has become problematic for many people who don't know how to handle it. But anyway, that was just a thought. So my recommendation though is Zodiac by David Fincher. Reunites the science bros Mark Ruffalo and Robert Downey Jr. in a very different way.
Yeah.
It's just a terrific movie overall. I mean, it's very thrilling. It's a very interesting take on the Zodiac killer. You also throw Jake Gyllenhaal in there, Mysterio, just for fun. Of course, I think everybody's in an MCU movie at this point, so you can just connect all the characters to it. But yeah, just a terrific movie, and Ruffalo and Downey Jr. are both great in it.
Nice.
Good pick.
That's it. I love that pick. All right, you guys are coming in hot. Some strong first picks. Duke, what do you got?
All right. Jacob, you didn't even mention that Josh Whedon did uncredited rewrites on Toy Story. That was a nice little connective tissue there too. Anyway, my first pick, of course, is going to be Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., the first MCU TV series. Now, why would I
Nice.
pick this? But it's because a lot of people didn't actually watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I had friends who watched the Marvel movies and they were like, no, I don't want to watch Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. And I will admit the first season is a bit rough. But once you get that Hydra twist, that show is just amazing. And then there's some connective tissue. The World Security Council that Fury talks to in Avengers, Powers Booth plays one of the characters. They bring him back in season 3, same character. He's secretly Hydra as well, spoiler. And you got all this connective tissue. Coulson, the cellist that Coulson mentions, him and Pepper Potts are talking about in Avengers. We meet her in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. So there's a lot of, lines. We find out how did Coulson get resurrected. It wasn't as a life model decoy. There's a whole thing. Seasons 2 and
Oh,
season
yeah.
4 are some of the best MCU content. Like season 4 is just like 3 separate story arcs. Ghost Rider, life model decoys, Hydra in like an alternate timeline. Oh, so good. And then apparently this is when I was doing research. We didn't really talk about this, how Marvel used to do one-shots, these short films. Item 47 picks up after Marvel's The Avengers. It deals with Lizzie Kaplan and her character's boyfriend, robbing banks with one of the Chitauri weapons. Apparently that, like Bob Iger or somebody watched that and thought it was good enough for a TV show, and that's how Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. came about. But interesting tidbit for there. But yeah, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., if you haven't, got to give it a chance. Power through that first season. You will be rewarded. The characters find personalities. And yeah, it's on Disney Plus now, so give it a shot.
Sweet.
I've watched
I
the
don't think
first 3
is rough,
seasons.
what you're saying.
Ooh, sorry.
Oh, Bob, you quit right before it got good. Season 4 is just so good. Ghost
I liked
Rider.
Hyde in season 3, actually.
Oh, the special effects, like they actually gave it a budget for the first few. Like there's one character who like can transform similar to the Hulk, and like the animation is surprisingly good. So yeah, they don't cheap out.
Sweet. All right. So we got Bob next, huh? We got Bob.
Okay. So all of my picks are superhero related. None of them are Marvel related,
Nice.
though. So my first pick is a movie. It is my third favorite group superhero movie. It features a group of more blue collar sort of superheroes who have to band together with a bunch of other second-rate superheroes that they actually auditioned for in order to take on a master supervillain after the one true superhero gets kind of disintegrated by accident. I'm talking about 99's classic Mystery Men,
Yep.
Nice.
featuring Ben Stiller, Hank Azaria, William H. Macy, Greg Kinnear, Paul Rubens, Janine Garofalo, Jeffrey Rush, Eddie Izzard, Tom Waits. It's just a stacked cast. It's hilarious.
Chris Tucker.
Is Chris Tucker in
No.
that? I don't think so.
Am I thinking of a different movie?
Kel Mitchell is in there, but from Keenan and Kel.
Different black guy.
He's pretty hilarious.
It's a good thing you made that mistake, Raph, instead of one of us.
It's still pretty bad.
Yeah, it's so full of quotable lines. It's a fantastic, underrated superhero comedy, and I highly recommend it. It's number one. All others are number two or lower.
Sweet. All right, cool. My first recommendation, I'm going to go with a museum.
Ooh.
And it's a pretty obvious museum. But if you've ever been to San Diego, which is where the original like Comic-Cons were all held, they still do huge Comic-Cons there every year. But there's also a Comic-Con museum, and the museum itself is like not all that impressive. And I don't know if this was just a limited exhibit that they had or if it's like a full-time exhibit, but I went there last fall and they had this really, really, really cool Stan Lee history of Marvel sort of exhibit with a lot of like original like writings and drafts of like first runs for different heroes. A lot of just like like they had like first issues and stuff that were up there, but just like a really cool sort of like timeline of his entire history, of Marvel's entire history, of how like all of our favorite characters came to be and their designs like over the years and things like that. Just like a really, really cool like bit of history for anyone who is a Marvel fan, which at this point is like pretty much anyone who has been a movie fan over the last, 12 to 15 years. So definitely worthwhile. I don't know if it's still there, but if it is, the Comic-Con Museum and the Stan Lee exhibit, that's going to be my first one.
Nice.
So, all right, we are back to RJ.
Okay, well, so I guess I spoiled this in the beginning of the podcast, but my next recommendation is X-Men, the animated series from the 90s.
Nice.
Because, yes, that was my, I mentioned my first experience in anything involving comics, and to this day, I still love it. It was great.
That show is amazing. I honestly, I might throw it on when we're done recording here, because that show is so cool.
So I could listen to Gambit all day from that. It's
Are you going to check out the X-Men 97 cartoon?
I'm afraid to. It's it's one of those sounds nice in theory things, but they're probably going to screw it up.
Fair enough, yeah.
But I'll probably try.
Fair enough.
I'll risk the disappointment.
Yeah. And if it is disappointing, you can just throw on, the original series and be happy again. So
just pretend like
not
it was a bad
thing.
dream.
Yeah, exactly. Amazing. All right, Jacob, we're back to you.
Well, my second recommendation is something that is going on right now, and it's not exactly under the radar, but if you're not watching Invincible on Amazon Prime,
Yes.
you are really missing out. It takes the typical comic book tropes, things that are very, very much like Avengers, and takes them to sometimes very violent ends. It plays with superhero physics and how that would actually kind of play out if you were punching people with that much power. But a wonderful show that's going on right now, but also it's kind of a, well, you said no 2-for-1s, but they're kind of the same thing. The Invincible comics
Yeah.
are absolutely amazing, and the show is just a pretty faithful adaptation of that. So read all through the Invincible comic. It only gets better from here. The show is only just a fraction of the greatness that is to come. So really recommend getting on that now while it's still young.
Is season 2 good? I've only watched season 1 so far.
Season 2 is been pretty good. There was one episode where it maybe was the first time it actually wasn't quite live up to the comics, but it's only been 4 episodes of season 2. The second half of the season actually debuts in March, so, and it's looking like it will be really good.
All right, I got to get back on that. Thanks for the reminder.
That's written by Robert Kirkman, the guy who created The Walking Dead as well. So, and he wrote every episode of the comic series. It's 127 issues, something like that.
And it's really, since we're talking about it in the frame of Avengers, it's like it boils down a whole comic universe into one. I mean, it's called Invincible, like it's just about him, but the whole universe is just expertly like condensed into that. And you don't have crossovers. They're just, well, there are crossovers to an extent, but it's all kind of self-contained, and it's amazing.
Nice. I have not watched it, so I think I'm missing out.
Ooh,
sounds like
get on that. It's bloody.
Love blood.
Every superhero show Amazon does needs to just be violent.
Ultra violent, yeah. Who doesn't love a bit of ultra violence? Different movie. All right, Duke.
All right, I'm going to save my non-MCU pick for last. So my next pick is, of course, the Disney Plus series Hawkeye. Interestingly enough, I can connect this to Avengers because this series introduces Haley Steinfeld. Is this Steinfeld?
Yeah.
Haley Steinfeld. Anyway.
Feld, yeah.
The True Grit girl. Really good. As Kate Bishop, the female Hawkeye. Hawkeye 2. And I believe the first episode begins, we find out that she was raised in New York. And when she was about 10 or 11 or 9, she witnessed the Battle of New York. And so we kind of get her perspective of the Battle of New York in that first episode for the first 5 minutes or so. And we see, and she sees Hawkeye doing his thing, shooting arrows. I think they show, him with the grapple arrow and, all that stuff. And that's, she idolizes Hawkeye from that moment on. So Raph, if she would have went to Avengers, she would have walked out saying Hawkeye's her favorite character. Like and then she wins, and then we cut to the title credits. Man, this is all coming back, and I haven't seen this since it came out. And
I love how excited you're getting.
As she ages, you see all these archery trophies. So she trained herself to be this expert archer because of Clint Barton. And then the series also tackles Barton when he was Ronin, which was his darker alter ego during the blip or whatever that 5-year gap is called after everybody was dusted. And it's got a couple, if you really haven't seen the show, it's got a little somebody from a certain Netflix Marvel show that pops up. Vera Farmiga. And Hawkeye, Disney Plus. Out of all the shows, it deserves a second season. And it's based on the Matt Fraction comic.
Yep.
Nice.
There you go.
Good pick.
I haven't watched it. I don't know that I ever will, but
you should.
I'm glad that you dig it, and thank you for recommending it. Thank you, Duke.
You're missing out, Raph. You're missing out.
I know. There's too much. There's too much to watch. There's so much stuff out there. Bob, what are you recommending for your second pick?
So my second pick is actually a comic series, collected version of comic series. It's an Alan Moore superhero series, but it's not The Watchmen. And it's not League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, which was a terrible movie, but is a fantastic comic that I also urge you to check out at some point. It's the Avengers of the late Victorian era. But anyway, the comic that I want to recommend is a comic called Top 10. Gene Ha did the art, and Alan Moore already, as I said, the writer. It's about a city of the future in which everyone from the mayor on down to the lowliest street sweeper has superpowers, and the story focuses on all of the cops that have to police a city in which any one person can suddenly be Godzilla attacking the city or have the power of a nuclear bomb. And it's super amazing, really well written, as Alan Moore's stuff is. And I don't think it's as well known as his other works. So, recommendation.
Nice. I love that. Awesome. Another thing to add to the reading list. While I don't watch Hawkeye.
Oh, come.
It is really good, though. Hawkeye show's
Yeah.
Oh, you watched it, Bob? Thank you.
I loved it. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. And
There
but
you
Bob,
go.
I gotta say, I the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen film is cheesy 2000s fun. That's all I'll say.
Hey man, the 2000s were definitely a time for superhero movies, and again, that time ended with this movie, with the Avengers. So I think for my second recommendation, I'm going to recommend an MCU movie. I'm going to go with the really, really obvious choice, but I still want to recommend it because I do think that as impressive of an achievement as this original Avengers movie is, and that everything that comes after like would not have happened if it weren't for the success and just like how well this movie works. Because, you know, I think a lot of people, sorry to ramble on. I think a lot of people will talk about this movie in regards to like the influence that it had over the industry for the next 10 to 15 years. But like this movie is also like really good on its own. But whatever. So I'm going to recommend another MCU movie that I find to be wholly impressive in terms of what it's doing and how it translates like TV comic book storytelling to the big screen. And you know, there are issues with the CGI and how it's presented and like the texture of it and all that stuff. But whatever. Avengers Infinity War is like one of the most impressive achievements of like modern media that it deserves a shout out. So I'm sure that everyone listening to this has seen Infinity War, but I would urge everyone to like watch it again and just think about how insane it is that Feige and everyone around it was like able to pull that movie together in the ways that they were. So that's my second pick. A basic choice, but I think still a worthwhile choice.
Nice.
Prove.
All right. RJ, back to you for the final pick.
All right, last pick. So yeah, last pick is the 2010 Red. Bruce
Nice.
Willis, Morgan Freeman, Helen Mirren being so awesome. And it is, I actually did not know this until recently that it was inspired by a comic series or a limited run comic series of the same name. Not necessarily, I think, just from what I saw, super related in the storyline, but that is, you know, it's close enough that I could I could throw it in here as a recommendation because it's just one of my favorite feel good fun movies to watch. Um, I love Bruce Willis in anything. I love Morgan Freeman in anything. They're it, it's just such a fun cast. John Malkovich, Carl Urban. They're just yeah. It's Richard Dreyfuss. Like it's great. It's much more. I think funny, you know, cheesy not than the Avengers is, but it's still an excellent ensemble cast with lots of fun action sequences and a good story. So
Yeah, I love that movie, and like the comic books, which is only like 2 issues or something like that, is so deadly serious. It's fine for what it is, but this movie added a sense of humor to it and elevated the whole story. That's a great pick.
Nice. I feel like Carl Urban should be in everything.
I agree.
every single movie ever.
Yeah. he's just like whenever he shows up, you're just like, yeah, this is gonna be good. Sweet, nice final pick. Who do we got? We're gonna go to Jacob. What's your final recommendation?
So my final recommendation is another superhero movie that involves another team, slightly smaller team, but close. It's also within Marvel, and we'll have a chance to see it again very soon. Of course, I'm talking about Josh Trank's Fantastic Four. Right? Kidding. I am actually talking about the 2005 Fantastic Four, which was certainly an attempt at what the MCU's doing with the Avengers. It has the 2000s, early 2000s cheese, a lot more even than the Avengers, and it's not as good of a movie, obviously. But you do get the chance to see Chris Evans acting more like Raph would, not being so lame. But also, Michael Chiklis is actually honestly pretty good as Ben Grimm. I think it's a fun, I think now looking back at it, it doesn't measure up obviously to the great superhero movies we got since then. But it's also not bad. It's a fun movie. You can watch it. It's pretty breezy. It's a fun one to revisit, especially as we see the MCU try to get it right here in a year or two. So I think it'd be fun to revisit now.
Oh man, Jacob, the Josh Trank's Fantastic Four joke is amazing. I don't know if many people will get the joke outside of a few of us, but Jacob, I really appreciate that. So amazing. But yeah, the original Fantastic Four, worth a revisit for sure. Excited for the new one. See how that goes. Duke, on to you. What's your final recommendation?
Fantastic Four. No.
Roger Corman's Fantastic Four.
Yeah. Release it.
Bob, you now have to start doing the same thing with that version.
The Doctor Doom actor just recently stated that Marvel should release that movie on its 30th anniversary. So
and 4K, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, 4K, upscale it. No, my final pick is not a superhero movie, but it is an ensemble picture. And as I previously teased earlier in this podcast, this is a film that set up its ensemble characters in previous films and then brought them together for quite possibly one of the best action movies of the 2010s. I'm surprised it's not in the canon. I'm talking Fast 5.
Nice.
The fifth film in the Fast and the Furious franchise. Sort of a departure from the previous four. There's only one street race. It's a heist. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson pops in to add some much needed rock to the movie. And it just kind of brings back all the fan favorites from the first four films, throws them together for a heist. And yeah, it's just so good. Like, this is the moment where the series actually clicked. And it's just, just watch it. You don't even need to watch this was the movie that got me into Fast and Furious. We got it because of The Rock. We watched it. I watched it again the next day. Then I went and bought the first four movies. Like, this
that movie has no business being as good as it is. And it perfectly balances being tongue in cheek in terms of how ridiculous the action is.
It got the balance correct. Where 6 and 7 just, and then now they're superheroes pretty much. Like, Fast 5 is just I don't know, something happened. The Kool-Aid or whatever was good in that writer's room because
there's a tonal balance in that movie that works on a level that really should not work. It's really remarkable that movie is as good as it is.
They had nothing to lose because look at the previous ones. After this made money, that's when it was like the Avengers. It's like, oh crap, now we actually have to try to make these films bigger. Where before, you had Iron Man, Thor, then you have the Avengers, and now you got to make everything almost like the Avengers. Fast 5, it's like, oh crap, now we have to keep topping ourselves because we made a really good movie.
And
so Fast 5.
That heist is like,
It's so
up
good.
there with the Battle of New York in terms of just like, amazing action set pieces
That's
of
so good. And
of like the
just like in
2010s.
Avengers Endgame, where they went back to the Battle of New York, Fast X relives the events of Fast 5. So, look at these comparisons. Just
You're killing it, Duke. You're absolutely killing it. You're a beast. That's why we
sometimes
love you.
rambling just makes it better in the end. You keep pulling these narratives.
I love it. All right. So we are back to Bob for your final recommendation.
All right. I'm doing all different media this time around. So the first one was the movie, second one was a comic book, and my third pick is actually a card game. I'm talking about Sentinels of the Multiverse from Greater Than Games. It's a game in which 4 players pick a hero. They have a deck with powers related to that hero. There's a villain deck that you're fighting against. There's a location deck, so it can be a city or like there's a place in Antarctica with dinosaurs or whatever. And the goal is to defeat the villain before all the heroes get destroyed. It's a cooperative game, super fun, relatively easy to pick up. They just put out a definitive edition like last year, I think it was. So well worth a look if you enjoy board games, cooperative board games with people.
That sounds like a lot of fun for like a game night. That's sweet.
Yeah, form your own team of Avengers.
Exactly. There we go. I love it. I love that pick. Okay, for my final recommendation, I am going to go with a season of TV. I did want to try to tie in a comic book run, but I feel like it feels a little too ham-fisted to squeeze into this. So I know I've talked a lot about how this movie adopts conventions of television storytelling to tell its story and then like build out the MCU going forward and all the various sagas and stuff. And so I feel like, in around the turn of the century, there was a lot of talk about prestige TV and how there were these TV shows that were pulling from like tools of filmmaking and like applying them to TV in ways that they hadn't been applied before. And then you get to 2012 and Avengers sort of like flips that on its head, and we're taking TV conventions and applying it to movies. And I feel like a TV show that is like a good mix of it's pulling from movies, and then a movie like Avengers is pulling from it in terms of how it like introduces characters and then has like a big climax at the end, and the story is all like sort of like wrapped up and resolved. And long story short, I'm recommending season 1 of The Wire. I feel like for all those parallels that I just explained, there is some sort of connection between, what that first season of that show is doing and what we are seeing in this movie.
That's too classy. I can't.
I have not seen The Wire, but I've heard so many great things about it. I have to wrap my head around watching that at some point.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of the shows, I could have gone with any of those shows, right? It could have gone with season of The Sopranos or, Breaking Bad or something. But I feel like The Wire, in terms of just like its setup, it kind of like season 1 really mirrors phase 1 of the MCU in a lot of like weird ways. So in terms of like character introduction and then like how they start interacting over time once you've been introduced to them and all that stuff. But yeah, guys, this has been so absolutely amazing. You guys have been all so awesome. Let's run through our recommendations one last time, a quick 1, 2, 3 for each of us, and then we'll say our goodbyes, and we'll go same order. So RJ, Jacob, Duke, Bob, Raph.
I was supposed to remember the order. Okay, so first recommendation was the animated movie Sing. Second recommendation, the 1990s X-Men the animated series, and then third was the 2010 movie Red.
My first recommendation was Zodiac by David Fincher, featuring the Science Bros. Recommendation number 2 was the Invincible TV series / comic. And recommendation 3 is the 2005 version of the Fantastic Four.
My first pick was Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. My second was Hawkeye. And then my third was Fast Five.
My first pick was the 1999 superhero comedy Mystery Men by Kinka Usher. My second was Top 10, comic book collection written by Alan Moore, art by Gene Ha. And my last pick was the card/board game Sentinels of the Multiverse by Greater Than Games.
Amazing. My first pick is the Comic-Con Museum, specifically the Stan Lee exhibit, if that's still running. My second pick is Avengers Infinity War. And my last pick is Season 1 of The Wire. Guys, Duke, Jacob, Bob, RJ, this has been absolutely incredible. I feel like we knocked this one out of the park. Thank you guys so much for joining.
Thanks for having us.
Hey, yeah, this was fun.
Yep, it's good times.
Always glad to be here.
Till Ultron calls us back, huh?
Yeah, exactly. Until we have to stop Thanos from gathering the Infinity Stones. Well, friends, I don't know if any of you have any final words that you want to say, any items on the website on Screen Age Wasteland that folks should be looking out for before we get out of here.
The next vault of the Canon gets open soon, doesn't it?
Tomorrow, March 7th, 2024, we'll be releasing the 35 films that will comprise Vault 4 of the written canon, which will
Sweet.
take us till early January 2025. So full year's worth of new canon films. So yeah, check the site tomorrow and see what made the cut. We're also on YouTube now. You can find new episodes, not new episodes. You can find old episodes of the canon on YouTube twice a week until we're all caught up, as well as some video essays that our friend Dahlgren puts together as well. We've been making some shorts, quotes. The "I'm always angry" quote from Avengers was one of our first Movie Monday quotes. We have TV Tuesday quotes, and coming up, there will be a Wire quote to tie it into Raf's pick. Wednesdays, we do Guess the Theme, which is right now it's TV themes. We give you clues. And then on Thursdays, we have Guess the Actor, where we give you 5 film or TV projects. And then you kind of got to figure out who it's going to be, and then we'll tell you at the end. It's like 30 seconds because they're short. So check out our YouTube. It's just Screen Age Wasteland. Like, subscribe, listen to the canon there, listen to it on Spotify, watch some videos, read some canon. You know, we're everywhere. The Wasteland, it's endless.
Multimedia.
Duke, will we know the Screen Age Wasteland Awards by Wednesday?
We will. Also, yeah. While you're on the site, check out who won the 5th annual Screen Age Wasteland Awards. We're going to sneak them in there right before the Oscars, so, you know, we get some buzz, maybe. I don't know.
Nice.
It's a close race.
As a tie-in to the Screen Age Wasteland Awards, I did find it funny. Oppenheimer, obviously Robert Downey Jr. likely to win an Oscar for his supporting turn, where he's all about the nuclear bomb, and in this movie he scoffs at the idea of a nuclear deterrent and literally saves them from a nuclear bomb. Just a funny thing.
That
if
is
the
a funny
Academy
tie-in.
was actually worth a damn, Downey would have won an Oscar for playing Tony Stark.
Yes.
Now
if that wasn't a superhero movie,
is a take.
come on.
was-
Come on. There's been
Yeah.
worse performances that have won an Oscar.
Whoa.
That's true.
Well, Duke, thanks for highlighting all that stuff on the YouTube page. Definitely a lot of cool stuff to check out there. Like Duke said, we are expanding our wasteland, expanding our empire, multimedia, as Bob said, a ton of stuff to watch, a ton of stuff to read, a ton of stuff to listen to. You're listening to this podcast, maybe on Spotify, maybe on Apple, maybe somewhere else. If you are listening, if you do like it, maybe throw us a nice review, a little rating. We'd really appreciate it. Smash all of those subscribe buttons all around. Share the articles. Share the videos. It's we're trying to build out a really cool community of film lovers. So we're happy that we can continue to grow this community, and we're happy to have you all with us. So again, Duke, Jacob, Bob, RJ, thank you guys for joining. Listeners, thank you for joining us as well. We will be back next week with another great movie. Gonna film bro out a little bit. We're gonna be talking about Goodfellas, our first Marty flick that we're gonna have an episode about. So that'll be super fun. Join us there. And in the meantime, we will see you in the wasteland.